The emergency beacon cut through the void of space like a desperate scream, pulsing red against the black canvas of stars. On the bridge of the Zephyrian research vessel Gentle Current, Captain Veltar's 4 eyes tracked the holographic display with growing dread. The signal originated from the Outer Rim territories, where civilized space met the unknown darkness beyond. "How long has it been broadcasting?" Veltar asked, her melodic voice carrying the weight of command despite her species' naturally soft tones. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and scientific pursuits, not for rescue operations in hostile space. Navigation Officer Kessani manipulated the controls with his delicate, crystalline fingers. 72 standard hours, Captain. The signal is automated, but we're detecting life signs. Approximately 300 souls aboard what appears to be a passenger transport. Veltar's throat sac inflated with concern, a biological response her species couldn't suppress. 300 beings, trapped somewhere in the void, broadcasting their final hopes into the uncaring darkness. The Gentle Current was equipped for research, not rescue, but galactic law was clear about distress signals. "Any other ships responding?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Negative, Captain. We're the only vessel within range." Kessani paused, his bioluminescent patches flickering nervously. "Captain, there's something else. The signal's origin point. It's near the Crimson Nebula." A collective shudder ran through the bridge crew. The Crimson Nebula was infamous throughout known space, a region where ships vanished without explanation. Some blamed pirates. Others whispered of ancient automated defenses left by long-dead civilizations. Whatever the truth, respectable species avoided it entirely. "Set course for the signal," Veltar commanded, her decision made despite her crew's obvious fear. "Maximum safe speed." The Gentle Current turned toward the nebula, its sleek hull reflecting starlight as they accelerated. The ship was a marvel of Zephyrian engineering, designed for deep space exploration with laboratories and sensor arrays that could analyze phenomena from light years away. Its crew of 43 scientists and support staff had never faced anything more dangerous than a solar flare. As they traveled deeper into the contested region, the ship's sensors began detecting other signals. Not distress calls, but something far more sinister. Energy signatures that suggested ships lying in wait, their weapons powered but silent. "Captain," Communications Officer Thelray announced, her voice tight with fear, "we're receiving a transmission. It's not from the ship in distress." The main screen flickered, then displayed a creature that made the Zephyrian crew recoil in horror. The being had mottled gray skin covered in ritual scars, multiple eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence, and mandibles that clicked menacingly as it spoke. "Zephyrian vessel, you have entered Scarthak hunting grounds," the pirate leader hissed in Galactic Common. "The prey you seek belongs to us. Turn back now, or join them in the slave pens." Veltar forced herself to remain calm, though her crew's terror was palpable. The Scarthak were among the most feared pirates in the galaxy, known for their brutality and their practice of taking prisoners for the illegal slave trade. "This is Captain Veltar of the research vessel Gentle Current," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "We are responding to a legitimate distress call. Galactic law requires." The pirate's laughter cut her off, a sound like grinding metal. "Galactic law means nothing here, soft one. This is our territory now. Your research ship will make a fine addition to our fleet, and your crew will fetch good prices in the outer markets." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Through the forward viewports, they could see the Crimson Nebula growing larger, its red gases swirling like blood and water. Somewhere within that maze of gas and radiation, 300 beings waited for rescue that might never come. "Captain," Kessani whispered, "perhaps we should contact the Galactic Council. Request military assistance." Veltar considered this. The nearest council fleet was weeks away, and by then, the stranded passengers would be dead or worse. Her crew looked at her with desperate hope, wanting her to make the choice that would take them away from this nightmare. Instead, she activated the ship's general communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. We are approaching a distress signal in contested space. The situation is dangerous, and I won't order anyone to risk their lives. However, 300 innocent beings are trapped and dying. If we don't help them, no one will." She paused, looking around the bridge at her crew. "I'm calling for volunteers. Anyone who wishes to participate in this rescue operation should report to stations. Anyone who prefers to remain safe should gather in the emergency shelters. There will be no shame in either choice." The response surprised her. Despite their fear, despite facing an enemy that could crush them without effort, 41 of her 43 crew members volunteered to help with the rescue. Only 2 junior technicians, both barely out of the academy, chose the safety of the shelters. As the gentle current entered the nebula's outer edge, its sensors struggled to penetrate the interference caused by the gas clouds and radiation. The distress signal grew stronger, but so did the energy signatures of the pirate ships lying in wait. "I'm detecting at least 6 vessels," announced sensor specialist Mordine, her tentacles dancing across the controls. "They're using the nebula's interference to mask their exact positions, but they're definitely there." Veltar studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The gentle current had defensive shields and could outrun most ships in open space, but trapped within the nebula's confines, they would be easy prey for the pirates. "Could we slip past them?" she asked hopefully. "Unlikely, Captain. They have us surrounded. The moment we move toward the distress signal, they'll converge on our position." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Outside, the nebula's crimson gases swirled hypnotically, beautiful and deadly. Veltar closed her 4 eyes and tried to think of a solution that didn't involve sacrifice. That's when a new signal arrived. It came without warning, cutting through the nebula's interference with startling clarity. The communication was audio only, but the voice that emerged from the speakers made everyone on the bridge freeze. "This is Captain Sareth Chun of the UES Indomitable," the voice announced. "We have received and acknowledged the distress signal. All vessels in the area, be advised that this region is now under human protection protocols. Pirates and other hostile forces have 10 minutes to withdraw before we implement standard Deathworlder response procedures." The silence that followed was deafening. The Zephyrians stared at their communication console, as if it had just spoken in an ancient, dead language. They had heard of humans, of course. The galaxy's newest species, recently admitted to the Galactic Council despite their shocking origins on one of the most dangerous planets ever discovered. Earth was classified as a Class XI death world, a planet so hostile that most species considered it uninhabitable. The fact that humans had not only survived but thrived there had caused considerable debate in scientific circles. Some called them an anomaly, others a biological impossibility. But they were here, and they were offering help. Did they just call this region under their protection? Felray asked in wonderment. Before anyone could answer, another transmission arrived. This one was from the pirate leader, and his tone had changed dramatically. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like fear. "Human vessel," the Scarthak commander growled. "You are outnumbered 6-1. These are our hunting grounds. Leave now, or we will destroy you along with the other prey." The human's response came quickly, and it carried an undertone that made even the peaceful Zephyrians feel a chill. "Negative. You have threatened innocent civilians and peaceful researchers. That's not acceptable. You now have 9 minutes to withdraw." On the gentle current's sensor display, a new contact appeared at the edge of their detection range. It was moving fast, far faster than should have been possible within the nebula's interference. As it approached, the sensors revealed something that made the crew gasp in amazement. The human ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of the gentle current, but that wasn't what shocked them. It was the weapons. The vessel bristled with more armaments than most species used in their entire naval fleets. Energy cannons, missile pods, defensive turrets, and weapon systems the Zephyrian computers couldn't even identify. By the eternal currents, Mordine whispered, that's not a ship, it's a mobile weapons platform. The human vessel took position between the pirates and both the distress transport and the gentle current. Its shields flickered online, creating a barrier of energy that seemed to bend space itself. The ship's hull was dark, scarred from previous battles, and covered in markings that spoke of countless conflicts survived. Attention, all vessels, Captain Chen's voice returned. This is your final warning. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The pirate leader's response was predictable. You're bluffing, human. 6 ships against 1, even a Deathworlder ship. We've heard stories about your species, but stories won't save you here. What happened next would be remembered in Galactic Council records for generations. The human ship moved with impossible grace for something so large, sliding sideways through the nebula gases while bringing its weapons to bear. The first pirate vessel never had a chance to react. One moment it was there, the next it was an expanding ball of superheated plasma. The remaining 5 pirate ships opened fire simultaneously, their combined firepower enough to level a small moon. The energy beams and missiles that struck the indomitable shields simply vanished, absorbed or deflected by defensive systems beyond anything in the Zephyrian database. The human response was swift and devastating. The Indomitable fired its main weapons, and 2 more pirate ships disappeared in brilliant flashes. The surviving pirates tried to scatter, but the human ship somehow predicted their movements, cutting them off with precise fire. In less than 4 minutes, all 6 pirate vessels had been destroyed. The mighty Scarthak raiders, terror of the Outer Rim, were simply gone. The human ship sat motionless among the debris, its weapons still powered but no longer firing. Zephyrian vessel, Captain Chen's voice returned, now calm and professional. This is Captain Chen. Are you injured or in need of assistance? Veltar realized she had been holding her breath. This is Captain Veltar. We are unharmed, thanks to your intervention. But how did you find us? How did you get here so quickly? We monitor distress frequencies across this entire sector, Chen explained. When we detected the signal and the pirate activity, we diverted from our patrol route. We're part of the human Outer Rim protection fleet. It's our job to ensure safe passage for civilian vessels. The concept was staggering. The humans had organized protection fleets for regions of space that other species considered too dangerous to patrol. They were voluntarily policing areas where even the Galactic Council feared to send its warships. The stranded transport, Veltar, said urgently. There are 300 passengers aboard. Already on it, Chen replied. We're detecting minimal life support. We'll have them aboard within the hour. Indomitable to transport vessel. Prepare for emergency docking. We're coming to get you. As the massive human ship moved toward the stranded transport, the Zephyrians watched in amazement. The vessel that had just decimated 6 pirate raiders was now performing a delicate rescue operation, extending docking bays and emergency medical facilities with the precision of a surgical instrument. Captain Chen, Veltar called. We're a research vessel with full medical facilities. We can assist with the wounded. But Captain Veltar? Some of the passengers are in critical condition. Your help would be invaluable. Over the next several hours, the rescue operation proceeded with remarkable efficiency. The human ship had extended its shields to protect both vessels, while medical teams worked to stabilize the rescued passengers. The transport had been adrift for days, its life support failing, and its supplies nearly exhausted. As Veltar worked alongside the human medical teams, she was struck by how different they were from their fearsome reputation. Yes, they were clearly warriors, their bodies showing the adaptations of a species bred by a hostile world. But they were also compassionate, working tirelessly to save every passenger, even risking their own safety to reach the most critically injured. Dr. Marcus Webb, the Indomitable's chief medical officer, explained the situation as they worked. The transport was carrying refugees from the Kepler-7 mining disaster, mostly families with children trying to reach the inner colonies for resettlement. Veltar felt her throat sack constrict with emotion. Children. The pirates had been planning to enslave children. Your ship, she said to Dr. Webb, it's designed for combat, but your medical facilities rival our best research hospitals. Webb smiled grimly as he worked to stabilize a young Altarian child. Humans learned long ago that if you're going to fight, you better be prepared to heal. Every one of our ships carries full medical facilities and trauma teams. We've seen what happens when help doesn't come. As the rescue neared completion, Captain Chen opened a channel to both vessels. All passengers have been successfully transferred and are receiving treatment. The transport is a total loss, but everyone is alive. The gratitude from the rescued passengers was overwhelming. Representatives from a dozen different species offered thanks in as many languages, their voices mixing in a chorus of relief and joy. Many of them had given up hope, certain they would die forgotten in the depths of space. But it was what happened next that truly amazed Veltar. As the three ships prepared to leave the nebula, Captain Chun made an announcement that left the Zephyrian captain speechless. This sector is now under regular human patrol, Chun declared. We'll be establishing a permanent monitoring station at the nebula's edge and conducting regular sweeps to ensure safe passage for civilian vessels. No one should have to face what these passengers endured. Veltar couldn't believe what she was hearing. The humans were taking responsibility for protecting an entire region of space, simply because it was the right thing to do. They weren't asking for compensation, territorial concessions, or political advantages. They were offering protection because innocent beings needed it. As the gentle current prepared to resume its research mission, Veltar found herself on a private channel with Captain Chun. Captain, she said carefully, may I ask why? Why did you come? Why do your people risk themselves for strangers? Chen's response would stay with Veltar for the rest of her life. Because someone has to, the human said simply. Because we know what it's like to be alone in the dark, facing something too big to handle alone. Because we remember what it felt like when no one came to help us. When we finally reached the stars, we made a promise. No one would face the darkness alone, not if we could help it. It doesn't matter if they're human or not. If someone calls for help, we answer. As the human ship disappeared into the stellar distance, its engines leaving a trail of light against the nebula's crimson backdrop, Veltar realized that the galaxy had changed. The age of helpless victims crying into the void was ending. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they were answering the call. 3 months after the rescue at Crimson Nebula, the galaxy was talking. News of the human intervention had spread through the communication networks like wildfire, reaching every corner of civilized space. In the gleaming towers of the Galactic Council headquarters on Centauri Prime, emergency sessions were being called to address what many species considered a dangerous precedent. Ambassador Kethvar of the Hegemony paced nervously before the assembled delegates, his reptilian features twisted with concern. The Hegemony had controlled Outer Rim security for over 2 centuries, charging substantial fees for their protection services. The idea of humans offering such services freely threatened their entire economic model. Esteemed colleagues, Kethvar began, his voice carrying the authority of one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. We must address the human situation before it spirals out of control. These Deathworlders are destabilizing established security protocols throughout the outer territories. The assembly hall buzzed with conversation as representatives from dozens of species discussed the implications. The Zephyrian delegation sat quietly in their designated section, still processing what they had witnessed firsthand. Ambassador Melthara of the Vegan Republic, her blue skin shimmering under the chamber's lights, stood to address the assembly. Ambassador Kethvar, with respect, the humans saved 300 innocent lives. How can this be considered destabilization? Because they acted without authorization, Kethvar snapped back. Because they established a protection zone without consulting the proper authorities. Because they're encouraging smaller species to believe they don't need to pay for proper security services. In the observer's gallery, Captain Veltar watched the proceedings with growing frustration. She had been invited to testify about the rescue, but the politicians seemed more concerned with trade agreements than the lives that had been saved. The debate continued for hours, with various species arguing both sides of the issue. The older, more established civilizations worried about precedent and jurisdiction. The smaller, more vulnerable species quietly celebrated the idea that someone might actually protect them without demanding tribute. Finally, the council president called for order. High Chancellor Zephyran of the Altarian Collective was one of the few beings in the galaxy whose authority was universally respected. Her species had been mediating galactic disputes for over 1,000 years, earning trust through absolute neutrality. "The question before us," Zephyran announced, her crystalline voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, "is not whether the humans had the right to act. Galactic law is clear that any vessel capable of rendering aid must do so in response to a legitimate distress call. The question is whether we should formalize this human protection initiative or attempt to regulate it." "With respect, High Chancellor," interrupted Admiral Vexthok of the Hegemony Navy, "these humans are military vessels operating outside any recognized command structure. They refuse to coordinate with established security forces and reject our oversight entirely. This cannot be allowed to continue." Captain Veltar had heard enough. She stood from her place in the observer's gallery, her normally soft voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "If I may," she called out, drawing surprised looks from the assembled delegates. "I was there. I saw what happened." High Chancellor Zephyran considered for a moment, then nodded. "The Council recognizes Captain Veltar of the Zephyrian Research Fleet. You may address the Assembly." Veltar made her way to the speaker's platform, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes following her movement. The Zephyrians were known for their scientific work, not for political speeches, but she had something that needed to be said. "Honored delegates," she began, "you debate jurisdiction and protocol while missing the fundamental point. When my ship detected that distress signal, we were alone. The nearest Council fleet was weeks away. The Hegemony security forces were nowhere to be found." Admiral Vexthok shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Hegemony collected massive fees for outer rim protection, but rarely ventured into the most dangerous areas. 300 beings were dying, Veltar continued, her voice growing stronger. Children, families, refugees from an industrial disaster. The pirates holding them planned to sell them into slavery. Not one of our established security forces was willing or able to help. The humans didn't ask for payment. They didn't demand territorial concessions or trade agreements. They simply came when others couldn't or wouldn't. They risked their lives for strangers, and then they stayed to make sure it wouldn't happen again. The chamber fell silent as Veltar's words sank in. In the 3 months since the rescue, reports had been flooding in from across the outer rim. Human ships appearing wherever distress calls were detected, arriving faster than anyone thought possible, equipped with weapons and medical facilities that surpassed anything in the galactic inventory. "The question isn't whether we should regulate them," Veltar concluded. "The question is why we haven't been doing what they're doing all along." Meanwhile, light years away in the outer rim territories, the humans were expanding their operations. The monitoring station at Crimson Nebula was now fully operational, its sensors capable of detecting distress signals across multiple star systems. 3 more human ships had joined the Indomitable on patrol, creating a network of protection that covered thousands of cubic light years. Captain Chun stood on the bridge of her ship, reviewing the latest intelligence reports from her communications officer, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. The data painted a disturbing picture of criminal activity throughout the region. "Ma'am," Rodriguez reported, "we're detecting increased pirate activity in the Kepler sector. Seems like word is spreading about merchant vessels traveling without proper escort. The local crime syndicates are taking advantage." Chun studied the holographic display showing shipping lanes throughout their patrol area. Red markers indicated known pirate bases. Yellow showed areas of increased activity, and green marked the safe corridors they had established through their presence. "What's our response time to the Kepler sector?" she asked. 14 hours at maximum burn," replied Navigation Officer Park. "But, Captain, we be leaving the Crimson approach unguarded." Shin nodded thoughtfully. The problem was becoming clear. No matter how fast their ships were or how well equipped, they simply didn't have enough vessels to cover the vast area that needed protection. The Outer Rim encompassed hundreds of systems across dozens of sectors, and criminal organizations were adapting to their presence by shifting operations to unpatrolled areas. "Ma'am," Communications Specialist Williams called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command." Shin turned toward the communication station. Contact with Earth Command usually meant new orders or policy changes from the Human Colonial Administration. She hoped it was reinforcements. "Put it through, Williams." The main screen flickered, then displayed Admiral Sarah Montgomery, commanding officer of the Human Outer Rim Fleet. Montgomery was a legend among human military circles, one of the original explorers who had first ventured beyond Sol System. "Captain Shun," Montgomery began without preamble, "I've been following your situation reports. Outstanding work with the Crimson Nebula incident, but I'm seeing a pattern in the intelligence data that concerns me." Shun straightened. "Yes, ma'am. Criminal activity is increasing in sectors outside our patrol range. The pirates are adapting faster than we can expand coverage." "Exactly, which is why we're implementing Operation Guardian Angel. I'm detailing the entire Third Fleet to Outer Rim protection duties. 27 vessels, including 4 heavy cruisers and 2 hospital ships." Chun felt a surge of relief. 27 ships would give them the coverage they needed to effectively police the entire region. "There's more," Montgomery continued. "We're also establishing permanent bases at strategic points throughout the Rim. Full facilities with repair yards, medical centers, and refugee processing stations. The Colonial Administration has approved unlimited funding for the project." "Admiral," Chun said carefully, "the Galactic Council is already concerned about our presence out here. Won't this expansion create additional political complications?" Montgomery's expression hardened. "Captain, in the past month alone, we've received over 200 distress calls from Outer Rim systems. Merchant vessels attacked, research stations raided, entire colony transports disappearing without trace. The established galactic security forces have responded to exactly 12 of those calls. The Council can debate jurisdiction all they want," she continued, "but we're not going to sit by while innocent people suffer. Humanity learned a long time ago what happens when good people do nothing in the face of evil." Chen understood. The history lessons were mandatory for all human military personnel. Earth's bloody past, filled with conflicts where intervention might have prevented massive suffering, had shaped their species' approach to interstellar relations. Never again would they stand by while others faced horrors alone. "Understood, Admiral. What are our rules of engagement?" "Standard protection protocols. Defend civilian vessels. Respond to all distress calls. Eliminate threats to innocent life." "But, Chun, there's something else. Intelligence suggests that some of the major crime syndicates are organizing a coordinated response to our presence. They're hiring mercenaries, pooling resources, planning something big." "How big?" "We're not sure yet. But keep your sensors sharp and your weapons ready. They tested us with small raids and individual pirate crews. Whatever comes next is going to be a real challenge." The transmission ended, leaving Chun to contemplate the implications. In 3 months, they had gone from responding to a single distress call to taking responsibility for protecting an entire region of space. The escalation was necessary, but it also painted an enormous target on human operations. 2 weeks later, that target became impossible to ignore. The attack came without warning, striking simultaneously at 3 different human patrol routes. Coordinated fleets of mercenary vessels, flying no flags, and using tactics that spoke of military training, ambushed human ships across a front spanning multiple star systems. The UES Defiant was the first to send a distress call. Captain Lisa Park's voice crackled across the communication channels as her ship fought desperately against overwhelming odds. "This is Captain Park of the UES Defiant," she transmitted, her voice strained but steady. "We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Estimate 15 to 20 vessels of various classes. They're using coordinated tactics and military-grade weapons." The Defiant was one of the newer ships in the human fleet, equipped with advanced shields and weapons systems that had proved effective against normal pirates. But these weren't normal pirates. "Our shields are down to 40%. Park continued her report. "They're targeting our engines and weapons systems specifically. This feels like a professional military operation." Chun listened to the transmission from the bridge of the Indomitable, her ship racing toward the battle at maximum speed. But they were hours away, and the Defiant was fighting alone against impossible odds. "Captain Park," Chun transmitted, "help is coming. Hold on as long as you can." "Understood," Park replied, her voice calm despite the desperate situation. "We're giving them everything we've got. They want to fight, they're going to get one." The battle lasted 6 hours. The Defiant fought with the courage and skill that had become synonymous with human military operations, but weight of numbers eventually told. By the time Chun arrived with reinforcements, the human ship was dead in space, its hull breached in multiple places, life support failing. But the attackers had paid a terrible price. Debris from 8 mercenary vessels drifted in the battle zone, testament to the Defiant's final stand. Captain Park and most of her crew had survived, rescued by emergency procedures that had saved them even when their ship couldn't be. Similar battles raged at 2 other locations, with human ships fighting desperately against coordinated attacks designed to test their limits. The message was clear. Someone with significant resources and military expertise wanted the humans out of the Outer Rim. "Admiral Montgomery," Chin reported during the emergency briefing that followed. "This was a probe. They wanted to see how we fight, what our capabilities are, how we respond to coordinated attacks." "Agreed," Montgomery replied from her command ship. "Intelligence is working to identify who's behind this, but preliminary analysis suggests involvement from at least 3 major crime syndicates, plus several mercenary companies. They're organizing against us specifically," added Captain Williams of the UES Vengeance, whose ship had fought off one of the other attacks. "These weren't random pirate raids. They were planned military operations with specific objectives." Montgomery nodded grimly. "Which means this is only the beginning. They've tested our individual ship capabilities. Next, they'll test our fleet responses and base defenses." "Are we pulling back?" Chin asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Absolutely not," Montgomery replied without hesitation. "We're doubling down. The 4th Fleet is being redeployed from the inner colonies. I'm also requesting volunteers from the civilian merchant marine to help with logistics and support operations." "Ma'am," Captain Park interjected from her medical bay aboard the rescue ship. "The civilian crews aren't trained for combat operations." "They won't be fighting," Montgomery explained. "But we need cargo haulers, medical transport, engineering support, communication relays. The Outer Rim is huge, and we can't protect it with warships alone. We need the infrastructure to support sustained operations." Chun understood the implications. Humanity was preparing for war, but not in the traditional sense. They were building a comprehensive protection network that would require unprecedented cooperation between military and civilian elements. "Admiral," she said finally, "what about the Galactic Council? Are we going to coordinate with them?" Montgomery's expression darkened. "The Council is still debating whether our presence constitutes a violation of territorial agreements. While they argue politics, people are dying. We'll brief them on our findings and offer cooperation, but we're not waiting for permission to save lives." The meeting ended with new orders for expanded patrols and accelerated base construction. Humanity was committed to the Outer Rim, regardless of political opposition or organized criminal resistance. But as Chun returned to her duties aboard the Indomitable, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The attacks had been too well-coordinated, too professional. Someone with serious resources and inside knowledge of human operations was organizing the opposition. The question was who and what they would try next. The revelation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kestai, a Zephyrian xenobiologist studying at the prestigious Altarian Science Institute, had been analyzing communication intercepts when she discovered something that chilled her to her core. Hidden within routine shipping manifests and cargo schedules was a pattern that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy against humanity. Professor Velthran, she called her supervisor, her 4 eyes wide with alarm. You need to see this immediately. Professor Velthran, one of the galaxy's leading experts in communication analysis, examined the data with growing concern. The coded messages were subtle, embedded in legitimate business communications between various corporations and trading companies across multiple star systems. By the eternal currents, Velthran whispered, this isn't just criminal syndicates. This is corporate. The pattern revealed coordination between major shipping conglomerates, security companies, and even some government agencies from the more militaristic species. They had been planning the anti-human operations for months, using their legitimate business networks to coordinate attacks and share intelligence. Dr. Kestai, Velthran said urgently, we need to get this information to the humans immediately. But, Professor, if we reveal this, we'll be exposing ourselves to retaliation from some very powerful interests. Velthran considered this for a moment. The corporations involved controlled significant portions of the galactic economy. Cross them, and the Zephyrian Research Institute could find itself facing financial ruin and political pressure. Dr. Kestai, she said finally, 3 months ago, when my cousin Captain Veltar was trapped in the Crimson Nebula, none of these powerful interests were willing to help. The humans risked everything to save strangers. Now it's our turn. Meanwhile, aboard the UES Indomitable, Captain Chun was dealing with a crisis of a different nature. The expanded human operations in the Outer Rim had attracted attention from an unexpected quarter, human refugees. Word had spread through the underground networks that humans were establishing safe zones in the Outer Rim. Families fleeing the ongoing conflicts in the Terran expansion zone began making dangerous journeys to reach human-controlled space, believing they would find safety and opportunity there. The problem was that the human fleet was equipped for military operations, not refugee resettlement. Their ships could provide emergency medical care and temporary shelter, but they weren't prepared for the flood of desperate civilians seeking new homes. Captain, reported Dr. Webb from the medical bay, we've got 43 refugees aboard from that transport we picked up near the Vega Junction. Families with children, all their possessions and whatever they could carry. Chun rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of command pressing down on her. They had rescued the refugees from a failing transport, but now what? Their ship wasn't equipped for long-term civilian housing, and the nearest human colony was weeks away. What's their situation? She asked. Medical condition is stable, but, Captain, these people have been traveling for months. They sold everything they owned to book passage on that transport, and it was barely space-worthy. They're desperate. The refugees presented a dilemma that went beyond simple logistics. They had come seeking the safety that human protection promised, but accepting them essentially meant acknowledging that human space in the Outer Rim was becoming a permanent settlement zone rather than a military patrol area. Ma'am, Communications Officer Williams interrupted, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Altarian Science Institute. They're requesting immediate secure communication. Chun frowned. Academic institutions rarely contacted military vessels directly. Put them through. The screen displayed Dr. Kestai, her Zephyrian features tense with worry. Captain Chun, my name is Dr. Kestai. I have information that affects the safety of your operations. Can we speak privately? Chun gestured for her bridge crew to continue their duties while she took the call in a ready room. Whatever the Zephyrian scientist had discovered, It was sensitive enough to require academic channels rather than official diplomatic ones. Doctor, you have my attention. Captain, my research has uncovered evidence of a massive conspiracy against human operations in the Outer Rim. It's not just criminal syndicates. Major corporations, security companies, even some government agencies are coordinating against you. Dr. Kestai transmitted her data, and Chan felt her blood run cold as she reviewed the evidence. The scope was staggering. Companies that controlled shipping lanes, manufactured weapons, provided security services, and financed trade operations had all agreed to work together to drive humanity out of the Outer Rim. Doctor, this intelligence is incredibly valuable. Why are you sharing it with us? Because 3 months ago, one of your ships saved my cousin's life. Because when others wouldn't help, humans did. Because what's happening to you isn't about business or politics. It's about whether good people will be allowed to help others without being destroyed for it. Chin studied the data more carefully. The conspiracy explained everything. How the attackers had known human patrol routes, why the attacks had been so well coordinated, how the mercenaries had obtained military-grade weapons and intelligence. Dr. Kestai, this data needs to reach Earth Command immediately. Can you provide additional details about the companies involved? I'm preparing a complete analysis, but, Captain, you need to know that they're planning something much larger than the probe attacks. References to final solution and total removal appear in the latest intercepts. After the communication ended, Chin called an emergency meeting with her senior officers. The threat they faced was far more dangerous than random pirate attacks. They were fighting an organized campaign by some of the galaxy's most powerful interests. Ma'am, asked Commander Torres, the ship's tactical officer, what's our response? Do we pull back to defensive positions? Absolutely not, Chin replied firmly. We're not abandoning civilians because some corporations don't like competition. But, Captain, Dr. Webb interjected, we're talking about enemies with resources that dwarf entire planetary governments. They can hire armies by politicians, control trade routes. Then, we adapt, Chin said simply. We've been fighting this like a police action. Time to start fighting it like a war. The first step was establishing a secure communication network that couldn't be intercepted or compromised by corporate interests. Human ships began deploying encrypted relay stations throughout the Outer Rim, creating a web of communication that bypassed traditional commercial networks. Next came intelligence gathering. If their enemies were using corporate networks for coordination, then humans would develop their own sources of information. Merchants, refugees, and civilian crews who had been helped by human operations became informal intelligence assets, reporting suspicious activity and corporate movements. But the most important change was philosophical. The human operation began transitioning from reactive rescue missions to proactive protection. Instead of waiting for distress calls, they started identifying threats before they could harm civilians. Captain Lisa Park recovered from her injuries and, commanding the new UES Retribution, led the first proactive mission. Intelligence indicated that a major slave trading operation was being planned in the Perseus sector, with corporate backing and government protection. Remember, Park briefed her crew, we're not waiting for victims this time. We're stopping the crime before it happens. The slave trading operation was centered around a seemingly legitimate mining consortium that used its facilities to process captured civilians for sale to illegal markets. Corporate security, backed by mercenary units, provided protection that local authorities couldn't or wouldn't challenge. The human assault was swift and devastating. 3 ships attacked simultaneously, targeting the mercenary fleet while deploying marine units to secure the mining facilities and free the imprisoned civilians. But this time, the humans didn't stop with rescue operations. They seized corporate records, communication logs, and financial data that revealed the full extent of the conspiracy against them. More importantly, they broadcast their findings across multiple star systems, exposing the corporate involvement to galactic scrutiny. The political reaction was immediate and explosive. Species that had remained neutral in the human protection debate suddenly found themselves forced to choose sides. The evidence of corporate-sponsored slavery and coordinated attacks on rescue operations was undeniable. Ambassador Melthara of the Vegan Republic stood before an emergency session of the Galactic Council, holding copies of the human intelligence data. "Esteemed colleagues," she announced, "we can no longer pretend this is a simple jurisdictional dispute. We have documented evidence that major galactic corporations have been funding criminal operations, sponsoring attacks on rescue vessels, and organizing slave trading networks. The humans haven't been destabilizing Outer Rim security," she continued, her blue skin flushed with anger. "They've been exposing the fact that there was no real security, only corporate-sponsored exploitation." Ambassador Kethvar of the Hegemony tried to maintain his position. "These allegations, even if true, don't justify unilateral human military action. Proper channels exist for proper channels?" Meltara interrupted. "The same proper channels that ignored 200 distress calls in the past month? The same proper channels that allowed corporations to fund pirate attacks? The same proper channels that let slave traders operate with impunity as long as they paid the right fees?" The debate that followed marked a turning point in galactic politics. Species that had built their economies on Outer Rim exploitation found themselves defending the indefensible, while smaller, more vulnerable civilizations finally had a voice in cosmic affairs. But the real change was happening in space, where human operations were evolving beyond anyone's expectations. The refugee crisis that had overwhelmed individual ships was being addressed through an innovative solution. Instead of trying to transport displaced civilians to distant human colonies, the humans began establishing permanent settlement stations throughout the Outer Rim. These weren't military bases, but civilian communities equipped with agriculture facilities, manufacturing capability, and educational systems. Refugees from multiple species found themselves building new lives in multicultural communities that represented something unprecedented in galactic civilization. "It's remarkable," reported Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a sociologist studying the settlement phenomenon. "These communities are developing faster and more efficiently than anything we've seen before. When beings from different species work together toward common survival, they share knowledge and techniques in ways that accelerate development exponentially." The settlements also served a military purpose. Distributed throughout the Outer Rim, they provided bases for human operations while creating civilian populations that had direct stakes in maintaining security and stability. More importantly, they were attracting volunteers. Beings from dozens of species were joining human operations, not as employees or subjects, but as partners in building something better. Captain Chun, now promoted to admiral and commanding the entire Outer Rim protection fleet, reviewed the intelligence reports with amazement. In 6 months, human operations had evolved from a single patrol ship responding to distress calls into a comprehensive civilization-building project. "Admiral," reported her intelligence officer, "we're detecting massive corporate fleet movements throughout the region. They're not trying to hide it anymore. Looks like they're preparing for open warfare." Chin studied the tactical displays. The corporations had finally decided that subtle pressure and covert attacks weren't sufficient. They were preparing to use their private military forces to drive humanity out of the Outer Rim by force. "How many ships are we looking at?" she asked. "Best estimate is over 200 vessels, including some that are military grade by any standard. They're not just trying to scare us away, Admiral. They're planning to destroy everything we've built." Chun considered this. 200 ships against the 37 vessels in the human fleet. The odds were daunting, but not impossible. Humans had faced worse odds before. "Send a message to Earth Command," she ordered. "Request immediate reinforcement and authorization for full military response." "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving transmissions from 17 different species governments. They're offering military assistance." Chun blinked in surprise. "Military assistance?" "Yes, ma'am. Apparently, the intelligence we gathered about corporate corruption has caused a political crisis in multiple systems. Several governments are offering to send warships to support our operations. For the first time since taking command, Chun smiled. The corporations had made a critical error. By organizing against humanity so openly, they had forced the galaxy to choose sides. And, increasingly, the galaxy was choosing the side that answered distress calls instead of ignoring them. The final battle for the Outer Rim was about to begin, but humanity would not be fighting alone. The corporate fleet assembled at the edge of the Helix Nebula was the largest private military force ever seen in galactic history. 237 vessels flying the colors of 6 different megacorporations, backed by mercenary units from across known space. Their combined firepower rivaled that of most planetary defense fleets. Aboard the flagship Corporate Dominion, CEO Magnus Krell reviewed the final attack plans with cold satisfaction. The human presence in the Outer Rim had cost his consortium billions in lost profits from protection fees, slave labor, and resource extraction. More importantly, their success was inspiring other species to demand better treatment from established powers. Admiral Voss, Krell addressed his military commander, a former hegemony officer who had been cashiered for excessive brutality. "Are your forces ready?" "Absolutely, sir," Voss replied, his scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. "We've identified 23 human installations throughout the sector. Once we eliminate their fleet protection, we'll bombardment every settlement, every station, every refugee camp until nothing remains." Krell nodded approvingly. "Make sure there are no survivors to spread their poisonous ideas about free protection and universal aid. The galaxy needs to understand that challenging corporate authority has consequences." "What about potential interference from other species?" Several governments have made supportive statements about human operations. "Political theater," Krell dismissed. "They'll express regret about the tragedy, but won't risk their trade relationships over a bunch of Deathworlder idealists." But Krell had underestimated how thoroughly the human intelligence revelations had changed galactic politics. In the Vegan Republic capital, President Yelthara was addressing an emergency session of Parliament. The chamber was packed with representatives whose homeworlds had suffered under corporate exploitation for generations. "Fellow citizens," she declared, "for too long, we have accepted that the strong prey upon the weak as a natural order. We have paid tribute to pirates and protection fees to corporations while our merchants suffered, and our colonies were raided. The humans have shown us an alternative. They ask for nothing and give everything. They risk their lives for strangers and build communities where all species can thrive together. Now, they face destruction by the very forces they have been fighting. I propose that the Vegan Republic formally join the Human Protection Alliance. Let us send our fleet to stand with beings who have proven that civilization means protecting the innocent, not exploiting them." The vote was unanimous. Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds as the human intelligence data continued to expose the web of corporate corruption that had controlled Outer Rim affairs for centuries. The Altarian Collective, the Centauran Federation, and 17 smaller species governments announced their intention to support human operations militarily. But it was the Zephyrians who provided the most crucial assistance. Captain Veltar, now promoted to Admiral and commanding the Zephyrian Deep Space Fleet, transmitted directly to Admiral Chun aboard the human command ship Freedom's Dawn. "Admiral Chun," Veltar said, her melodic voice carrying new authority, "our scientists have been analyzing the corporate fleet formations and tactical plans. We believe we can provide information that will be decisive in the coming battle." Chin appeared on the communication screen, her expression grim but determined. "Admiral Veltar, any intelligence would be appreciated. We're facing 4-to-1 odds, even with the Allied support. The corporate fleet is large but disorganized," Veltar explained. "Each company maintains independent command structures and communication systems. They've never operated together before. Dr. Kestai's team has developed a way to exploit their coordination weaknesses. The intelligence was invaluable. The corporate fleet might have superior numbers, but they suffered from classic problems of coalition warfare: conflicting objectives, incompatible communication systems, and commanders more concerned with their own survival than overall victory. The human strategy, developed in coordination with their new allies, exploited these weaknesses ruthlessly. When the corporate fleet entered the Outer Rim, they expected to face scattered human ships in desperate defensive actions. Instead, they found themselves confronting a coordinated defense network that had been months in preparation. Admiral Chun commanded the operation from her flagship, coordinating not just human vessels but ships from a dozen different species, each contributing their unique capabilities to the defensive effort. "All vessels, this is Admiral Chun," she broadcast on the Alliance frequency. "Execute plan Shatter." The first phase of the battle demonstrated why the human fleet had been so successful against individual threats. Human ships moved with precision and coordination that reflected months of operating together in life-or-death situations. They didn't just fight as individual vessels, but as a unified force multiplier. The corporate fleet, confident in their numerical superiority, advanced in traditional formation toward the primary human settlement at New Haven Station. They expected the humans to fall back, protecting their civilian populations through defensive maneuvering. Instead, the human fleet attacked. The UES Indomitable, now serving as Admiral Chen's flagship, led a spearhead assault directly into the corporate formation center. Behind them came Alliance vessels from half a dozen species, each one crewed by beings who had personal reasons to hate corporate exploitation. The first corporate vessels to die were the mercenary ships, hired muscle that had expected an easy battle against outnumbered opponents. The Vegan Republic cruiser Justice demonstrated why their species had survived in a hostile galaxy for millennia, its weapons systems reducing 2 pirate vessels to scrap in the first exchange. "Sir," Admiral Voss reported to CEO Krell, "we're taking heavier casualties than expected. The human ships are more heavily armed than our intelligence indicated, and they're supported by what appears to be a multi-species alliance." Krell's face twisted with rage. "Impossible. No government would risk their trade relationships over this. Sir, I'm detecting ship signatures from at least 8 different species. This isn't a small support group. This is a formal military alliance." The battle raged for 6 hours across multiple star systems. The corporate fleet's advantage in numbers was gradually eroded by superior coordination and higher individual ship quality. More importantly, the human-led alliance fought with a unity of purpose that their enemies couldn't match. Each human vessel was equipped with the lessons learned from months of rescue operations. Their medical facilities saved crew members who would have died aboard other ships. Their engineering teams kept weapons and shields operating under damage that would have crippled lesser vessels. Their crews fought with the knowledge that they were protecting communities they had helped build. But it was the Alliance vessels that provided the crucial edge. Zephyrian ships used their superior sensors to coordinate targeting across the fleet. Vegan Republic cruisers provided heavy fire support, with weapons designed to fight much larger opponents. Altarian fast attack craft struck at corporate communications and command vessels, disrupting coordination that had been fragile to begin with. The turning point came when CEO Krell made a crucial error in judgment. Frustrated by the resistance and mounting casualties, he ordered his fleet to target the civilian settlements directly. If he couldn't defeat the human fleet in open battle, he would force them to choose between protecting their ships and protecting their civilians. "All vessels," Krell broadcast, "new target priority. Begin bombardment of New Haven Station and all associated civilian facilities." The order changed everything. Up to that point, the battle had been a military engagement between opposing fleets. The moment corporate ships began targeting civilian populations, it became something else entirely. Admiral Chun to all human vessels. The transmission echoed across the battle zone. New rules of engagement. No quarter. They've targeted civilians. What followed was unlike anything seen in galactic warfare for centuries. Human ships that had been fighting with professional military precision suddenly displayed the savage fury that had allowed their species to survive on a death world. The U.S. Vengeance broke formation to intercept 3 corporate cruisers approaching New Haven Station. Captain Williams knew his ship couldn't survive against those odds, but he could buy time for evacuations. Instead, he discovered that Vegan Republic and Altarian ships had followed him, turning a suicide mission into a devastating counterattack. "This is Captain Williams," he transmitted to the corporate ships. "You targeted children. That was your last mistake." The 3 corporate cruisers were destroyed in 14 minutes. Similar scenes played out across the battle zone as Alliance vessels converged on any corporate ship that had fired on civilian targets. The message was clear. There were lines that civilized beings did not cross. CEO Krell watched his fleet disintegrate with growing panic. Admiral Voss ordered general retreat. "We'll regroup," and, "Sir," Voss interrupted. "The retreat order has been given, but less than half our ships are responding. The rest are either destroyed or have surrendered." Surrender? Krell couldn't believe what he was hearing. "These are professional military units. Sir, they're facing an enemy that's demonstrated superior coordination, superior technology, and absolute commitment to their cause. Our mercenaries signed up for an easy battle against scattered Deathworlders, not a fight against a multi-species alliance defending their homes." The corporate fleet's collapse accelerated as individual ship commanders realized they were fighting for corporate profits, while their enemies were fighting to protect families and communities. Morale shattered, and what had begun as an organized assault turned into a rout. Admiral Chun watched the tactical display as the last corporate vessels either fled the system or surrendered to Alliance forces. The Outer Rim's largest private military fleet had been scattered in a single engagement, but the cost had been significant. 17 Alliance vessels had been destroyed or severely damaged. Over 300 crew members had been killed, with hundreds more wounded. The civilian settlements had suffered bombardment damage that would take months to repair. But they had won something more important than a military victory. They had proven that species could work together to protect the innocent without expecting profit or political advantage in return. Admiral Chun, Captain Veltar, transmitted from the Zephyrian flagship. Preliminary damage assessment indicates that New Haven Station's civilian casualties were minimal. The evacuation procedures worked. Chun felt relief wash over her. Protecting civilian lives had been their primary objective throughout the battle, more important than destroying enemy ships or controlling territory. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 47 corporate vessels. They're requesting prisoner of war status and protection under galactic conventions." Chun considered this. The standard military response would be to accept the surrenders and process the prisoners according to established protocols. But these weren't standard military opponents. Grant the surrenders, she decided, but with conditions. Any crew member who participated in attacks on civilian targets will face trial for war crimes. Anyone who is following orders without knowledge of civilian targeting will be repatriated to their home systems. And the corporate leadership? Chen's expression hardened. CEO Krell and his command staff are to be arrested and held for trial. The galaxy needs to understand that ordering attacks on civilians has consequences, regardless of how powerful you think you are. As the Alliance fleet regrouped and began rescue operations, news of the battle spread throughout galactic civilization. The corporate attempt to destroy the Human Protection Network had not only failed, but had exposed their willingness to target innocent civilians to maintain their power. The political repercussions were immediate and devastating for corporate interests throughout the galaxy. Species that had remained neutral declared their support for the human-led alliance. Trade relationships that had enriched exploitative corporations for centuries were suddenly terminated. Most importantly, the idea that protection should be free and universal rather than profitable and selective began spreading beyond the Outer Rim. But Admiral Chin knew that their real work was just beginning. They had won the right to continue their mission, but the galaxy was vast, and there were countless beings still calling for help in the darkness. The Deathworlders had answered one call for aid and sparked a revolution. Now they had to prove that the revolution could build something better than what it had destroyed. 2 years after the Battle of Helix Nebula, Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, watching ships from 43 different species dock at the massive facility. What had begun as a simple response to a distress call had evolved into something that was reshaping galactic civilization itself. Unity Station orbited a neutron star at the edge of what had once been called the Lawless Outer Rim. Now, the region was known as the Free Territories, a zone where protection was guaranteed, trade was fair, and no being was abandoned to face danger alone. Admiral, reported Commander Torres, who had served with Chun since the early days aboard the Indomitable. The morning briefing is ready. We got some interesting developments to discuss. Chun nodded, taking one last look at the bustling port where Zephyrian research vessels docked next to human cargo haulers. Vegan Republic cruisers shared maintenance bays with Altarian explorers, and refugee transports from dozens of species unloaded families seeking new lives in the territories. The transformation had been remarkable. What had started as human military patrols responding to distress calls had become a comprehensive civilization-building project that attracted beings from across the galaxy. The settlements that had begun as refugee camps were now thriving multi-species colonies with their own industries, universities, and cultural centers. In the briefing room, Chin reviewed the latest reports with her senior staff, now representing multiple species and specialties. Dr. Kestai, the Zephyrian scientist who had first warned them about the corporate conspiracy, now served as their chief intelligence officer. Captain Veltar commanded the Alliance's exploration fleet, mapping new regions and establishing contact with previously unknown species. First item, Torres announced, we've received formal requests from 12 more planetary governments to join the Free Territory Alliance. That brings the total membership to 68 systems across 23 species. Chin smiled at the irony. The alliance that had formed to fight corporate exploitation was now larger and more influential than most of the traditional galactic powers. They had become what they had never intended to be, a major political force. What's the nature of their applications? Chin asked. Dr. Kestai consulted her datapad. Mostly standard requests for protection and trade agreements. But, Admiral, we're also receiving applications from systems within the traditional core territories. Planets that have been members of the Galactic Council for centuries are asking to join our alliance instead. This was a development that worried Chun. The Free Territory Alliance had been careful to position itself as a supplement to existing galactic authority, not a replacement for it. They provided services in regions where traditional governments couldn't or wouldn't operate, but they hadn't sought to compete with established civilizations. Any particular reason for the defections? She asked. Captain Veltar, attending via hologram from her exploration ship, provided the answer. Admiral, our intelligence suggests that the corporate trials have exposed corruption throughout traditional galactic government. Species are discovering that their representatives have been taking bribes, their military forces have been compromised by corporate interests, and their protection services have been deliberately limited to maintain corporate profit margins. The war crimes trials following the Battle of Helix Nebula have been a watershed moment in galactic justice. For the first time, corporate executives and their political allies were being held accountable for their actions. CEO Magnus Krell and dozens of his co-conspirators have been sentenced to life imprisonment, their assets seized to compensate victims of their crimes. More importantly, the trials had revealed the full scope of the corruption that had infected galactic civilization for centuries. The evidence presented in court showed systematic exploitation, deliberate suppression of aid to disaster victims, and coordinated efforts to maintain artificial scarcity and conflict. Dr. Kestai, Chen asked, what's your assessment of the stability of traditional galactic government? The Zephyrian scientist's expression was troubled. Admiral, we may be looking at the collapse of the current system within a decade. Too many species have lost faith in institutions that prioritize corporate profits over citizen welfare. They're looking to us as an alternative. This was exactly what Chun had hoped to avoid. The alliance had been created to protect the innocent, not to overthrow governments. But it seemed that providing an example of what functional, honest governance looked like was inherently destabilizing to corrupt systems. Ma'am, Commander Torres interjected, there's something else. We've been receiving communication from species outside known galactic boundaries. Word of our operations has reached civilizations that have never had contact with the Galactic Council. Chun looked up sharply. First contact with unknown species was always delicate, but contact motivated by reputation for protection was unprecedented. What kind of communications? She asked. Formal diplomatic requests, mostly. Species that have been isolated by geography or technology, but have heard about the alliance through trade networks. They want to know if our protection services extend to non-member civilizations. Captain Veltar's image flickered as her ship moved through a communications dead zone. Admiral, I can confirm this. My exploration fleet has encountered 7 previously unknown species in the past month alone. They all know about the alliance, and they all want to establish relations. Chin realized they were facing a fundamental question about the scope of their mission. When they had first responded to that distress call at Crimson Nebula, they had been thinking about protecting a few hundred passengers. Now they were being asked to take responsibility for galactic civilization itself. There's more, Dr. Kestai added quietly. We've detected signals from outside our galaxy. Species from Andromeda appear to be monitoring our communications and requesting information about our protection protocols. The silence that followed was profound. The idea that their operations had attracted attention from extragalactic civilizations was both thrilling and terrifying. They had barely figured out how to manage one galaxy's worth of problems. All right, Chun said finally, let's address the immediate issues first. Torres, prepare diplomatic responses to the membership applications. We'll need to interview each applicant government to ensure they meet our standards for citizen welfare and species equality. Dr. Kestai, I want a full analysis of galactic political stability. If traditional governments are collapsing, we need to understand the implications and prepare for refugee situations. Captain Veltar, continue your exploration missions, but add formal diplomatic protocols. If we're making first contact with unknown species, we need to do it properly. What about the extragalactic communications? Torres asked. Chun considered this carefully. Contact with alien galaxies was beyond anything the Alliance was prepared for, but ignoring the communication seemed wrong. Their entire philosophy was based on answering calls for help, regardless of where they came from. Prepare a standard first contact package, she decided. Information about our protection protocols, our alliance structure, and our basic philosophy. If they want to know about us, transparency is better than mystery. As the meeting concluded and her staff dispersed to their duties, Chun found herself thinking about how far they had come from those early days of simple rescue missions. The Alliance now operated over 300 ships, protected 68 star systems, and maintained diplomatic relations with civilizations spanning multiple galactic arms. Their medical facilities treated patients from dozens of species. Their schools educated children of every known race. And their protection fleets responded to distress calls across a volume of space larger than most traditional empires. But it was the philosophy that had proven most revolutionary. The idea that protection should be freely given rather than sold, that species could cooperate without competing, and that civilization's strength came from its care for the weak rather than its ability to exploit them had spread far beyond the territories they directly controlled. Young beings across the galaxy were demanding that their governments adopt alliance principles. Trade unions were organizing based on alliance labor protection standards. Even traditional military forces were beginning to incorporate alliance rescue protocols into their operations. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. There had been resistance from entrenched interests, political pressure from traditional powers, and the constant logistical nightmare of coordinating protection services across such a vast area. But every time Chin questioned whether they were taking on too much responsibility, she remembered that first distress call. 300 passengers stranded in pirate-controlled space, facing slavery or death, with no one willing to help. The answer then had been simple. Someone had to come. The answer now was the same. "Admiral," her communication officer called out, "we're receiving a priority distress signal from the Magellanic Cloud region. Unknown vessel. Approximately 50,000 life signs, requesting immediate assistance." Chen smiled as she headed for the command center. 50,000 beings in distress would have been an impossible rescue mission 2 years ago. Now, it was just another day in the free territories. "Scramble the nearest rescue fleet," she ordered. "Full medical support, refugee processing capability, and military escort in case of hostile interference." "Admiral," the officer asked, "what if this is another corporate trap? What if we're walking into an ambush?" Chen considered this possibility. The Alliance had faced numerous attempts at retaliation from surviving corporate interests, and their success had made them targets for various criminal organizations and political groups. "Then, we'll deal with it like we always do," she replied. "But we're not going to let fear of ambush prevent us from answering calls for help. That's not who we are." As the rescue fleet launched from Unity Station, Chen reflected on how the human concept of duty had changed the galaxy. Earth had been a death world that taught its children that survival required cooperation, that strength came from helping others, and that civilization meant protecting the vulnerable. Those lessons, learned in the harsh crucible of a hostile planet, had proven to be exactly what galactic civilization needed. The transformation was far from complete. There were still regions of space where corporate exploitation continued, still governments that prioritized profit over citizens, still countless beings facing danger with no one to help them. But the revolution had begun. Every distress call answered, every refugee rescued, every act of protection freely given proved that there was an alternative to the old ways of doing business. Years later, historians would mark the response to that first SOS at Crimson Nebula as the moment galactic civilization began to mature. When beings from a death world heard strangers calling for help in the darkness and simply answered, "We're coming." The message had spread across the galaxy and beyond. No one would face the void alone, not as long as someone was able to answer their call. The Deathworlders had taught the galaxy that the strongest civilizations were built not on the ability to destroy enemies, but on the willingness to save friends. In the vast darkness of space, where countless voices still cried out for help, the answer echoed back with increasing strength, "We're coming." Someone will always come.